EGM Network.
Treasure Coast Connector. Connecting residents and businesses of the Treasure Coast. And here's your host, Ellen Contreras.
Welcome to Treasure Coast Connector. I'm your host, Ellen Contreras. This episode is unprecedented, very different than any that I've ever done in my over 7 years of having this show. My father and I flew home just a few hours before the attacks of 9/11. We landed in LaGuardia Airport, didn't realize a few hours later the Twin Towers were going to be gone. And in just a few weeks from now, we're going to be celebrating the 25th anniversary. This has affected untold countless thousands of lives. And I have two very special people on the show, and I'm going to hand the reins over to them. In the studio today, I have Stephen Koski, and he's an IT consultant, but he's also military. He is a veteran. And on the day of 9/11, you're going to hear his amazing story of what he did as a volunteer first responder. Joining us from the UK remotely is John Buckley. They are colleagues. They were working together that day, and they have a very important story to share because we need your help to get the help that Stephen needs. And with that, Stephen, I hand the reins over to you, sir.
Sure. Thank you very much, Ellen. And John, thank you for joining us from England today. Really excited to have this conversation and talk through what's going on. So on the morning of 9/11, 2001, I was a civilian at that point, living in Manhattan, and John, I was on the phone with John. We were, having a routine business call. It was morning in New York, afternoon in London, and that's basically how the day began. John, what do you remember about that call?
So in fact, Steve, it was more than just you and I. There was quite a few people on that call. There were two calls, in fact. Because there were two parallel projects running, one which was 8 o'clock my time as 1 p.m. your time, and the second one was at 9 a.m. And each of us had to give an update. Steve was incredibly managing this multi-line project plan. I say multi-line, probably tens of thousands of lines of tasks and so on, and each of us had to give an update on our various tasks. So I'd finish my update. And not that I sit back in these calls, kind of listening to what was going on, and one of my colleagues was next to me giving his update when I got a flick through on the internal message system from my boss saying a plane had hit the World Trade Center. But at that point, that was all we knew, and we were kind of speculating that it was a light aircraft that had somehow wandered off course and made a navigation error, because we had no idea that the weather was crystal clear in New York, and that kind of thing would be very unlikely to happen. So we didn't really react very much to it. I'm kind of now, in retrospect, ashamed to say, because it was a pretty monumental day, and what was happening was unprecedented at the time, even compared to a lot of the stuff that was going on in London. So we continued the call, and then gradually, as more news came about, it transpired that it was a commercial aircraft that had hit the World Trade Center, and Steve was on the call, and I think, Steve, if I'm right in saying that you said that you had to leave, and that one of us would take the reins in terms of walking through the plan to allow the call to run to completion at 2 p.m. your time, 9 a.m. our time. So we did that, and then the 9 a.m. call began, and of course Steve wasn't there to run it, so I volunteered to run through the plan. But nobody really showed up, and of course the reason was the internet was severely disabled. Nobody could actually get on the call, and of course people were trying to find more information about what was happening. And shortly after, I was trying to get some kind of quorum going on at this meeting. The message came through to a second plane had hit the second tower, and so we abandoned the call. There was really no point. There was very few people on it, and of course we were all desperately trying to find out more information, none of which was actually coming through at that point.
Yeah, and I actually this morning looked up to see what the exact times were, and I believe the first plane was maybe 8:52 or something. So that was right during our first morning call, And then the second one was just after 9 o'clock, a little bit after 9 o'clock was when the second plane hit. And obviously at that point, it was very apparent that, this was not an aircraft accident or something minor, that we had a major event on our hands, and we were going to need to work through it. And so that at that point, that's when I began moving downtown. So I had to make 2 attempts to get downtown. The first attempt, I hopped in a taxi cab going downtown. I think it was Lexington and 85th. I caught the cab, got down to 34th Street, where NYPD turned me around because they had a cordon to seal off downtown. Came back uptown, and then I had a second apartment I was moving into at 14 East 80th. So I had the cab drop me off at the second apartment, not where I'd been doing the project call, but the second apartment where I started moving stuff to, including my running clothes. And so then I went to the second apartment, got in my running clothes, and ran down through Central Park and kind of began making my way through there. And John, I wanted to ask you, can you describe a little bit of sort of your situation? I believe you were in London in an office environment. Is that what was going on?
I was at our office. It was in the Strand in London, and it was quite a low building. I think it had 5 floors. It was actually an old theatre that had been converted to office blocks. And in that building, we had our command and control center for all of the European data centers, which the theatre lended itself quite well to that kind of situation, in that we had all the monitor screens on one big panel, and the operators were sitting at desks facing that big kind of wide screen, as they would be kind of watching a theatre going on. Instead, they were watching the various red and green lights and so on, which was the data center activities, and which computers were up and which were down. So in the context of what happened, it seemed a bit surreal, really. And I remember it as people were sort of talking about it a bit, but not really reacting, and they're just carrying on as normal. And we were trying to find out information about what was going on, but there wasn't a suggestion that the London or Europe was under attack in any way. And that didn't happen until quite a bit later. And we were asked to evacuate somewhere around 4 to 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And I think you have to remember that we Londoners have been through sort of bombing, random bombs being let off, and stations evacuated at fairly short notice for quite some time. And then, not within my living memory, but within my parents, my mum and dad's living memory, the Blitz, of course, which was devastation as far as London was concerned. So the whole notion of bombs going off and airplanes and so on wasn't something that was strange to us. But if you contrast that with some of the bomb scares that we had during my working life, where you might be commuting in to Victoria Station, for example, and suddenly find that your train was held outside it because the station had been evacuated. Nothing compared to this, which was on a whole new level. And of course, I'm saying this because we learned that very much later. And if I wind the clock back to about 3 p.m., which would have been about 10 p.m. your time on the East Coast, it was a bit surreal. It was almost like nothing had happened. And it wasn't till around 3:30 that the television news began broadcasting. The BBC began broadcasting what had happened, with just repeated shots of the aircraft flying into the towers and so on. And normally, because this was a command and control center, that room was out of bounds. The normal office staff weren't allowed to use it. And of course, they were quite severely disciplined if they were. So, I mean, you couldn't watch television during normal working hours. It was for people who were on shift. But we gave permission for people to enter that room and watch it on television. And I remember somebody saying to me, this is history in the making. We'll be talking about this in, ironically, 25 years' time, and they'll be teaching it in schools in the history books. So we all kind of gathered around and stared in horror at these pictures, which were taken, I think, from the helicopter that was attempting to rescue people from the top of one of the towers. And the really, really graphic close-ups of what was going on, quite dramatic. And it was then, I think, that it really hit us all. And shortly after that, we received the order to evacuate the building. And I think most of us went home at that point.
And John, I remember, actually, I was on that second bank call for just a couple minutes, and that's when I departed. And what I remember most of all about you was just the calmness and clarity that you had as this was occurring.
Well, thank you, because I don't think we were feeling that calm. I think it's I don't know whether it's embedded into the psyche or the culture, given the history of the UK and Europe, but it's certainly reacting to threats and bomb threats and so on. It was just kind of, well, we've got to get on with it, really. We can't be beaten by this stuff. We've got to get to work, or we've got to get home, or we've just got to carry on. And that was more or less the attitude that we held throughout the day. Again, I think there wasn't a suggestion that London was under threat until very much later in the day. So that probably accounts for some of the calmness. But I think the sense in the office was simply that, whatever's happening in the States, we have to, the show must go on. We have to let it continue.
Yeah. And so at this point of the Central Park, I get into Times Square. I'm running down to Times Square, and you can see on the graphic here, this is the first person we're looking for. He's a Con Edison employee, 50s, late 50s, salt and pepper hair, white male, very competent. He definitely wasn't headed to work inside a manhole that day. Probably was going to the office or something, and he's headed down 7th Avenue through Times Square. I can hear his truck behind me because there's no one in Times Square. Even during a hurricane, you have human beings in Times Square. In a snowstorm, a blizzard, the Naked Cowboy's still out there playing. All these things are happening in Times Square. There was no one in Times Square. And this gentleman from Con Ed, who we are trying to locate, gave me a ride downtown. And so this is now my second attempt downtown. NYPD stopped me the first time. Now we're going inside of an official vehicle. I showed him an old military ID I wasn't supposed to have. He let me in. He's like, I'll give you a ride. I'm going downtown to shut off the gas. So that's basically where we got to as far as heading downtown. And now I'm heading downtown to Con Edison vehicle.
Yeah, and I think what we're going to do, we're going to take a quick 2-minute break, but Stephen and John have a lot more to discuss, and we're going to look at a photo of Stephen from back in 2001 because we need your help for those that are going to be watching this episode on EGM Network on YouTube and Treasure Coast Connector YouTube, because we have to connect people that were there so that they can prove that Stephen was there working, because he has some health issues that he needs to address. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
We all have that pair of jeans hiding in the back of our closet with hopes of wearing them again. Slim Therapeutics can make that hope a reality. Our GLP therapy offers personalized weight loss, helping you quiet that food noise, reduce those cravings, and boost your overall health. Pair that with our customized HRT for men and women. Let's balance those hormones, improve sleep, and restore your energy. Visit us in downtown Vero Beach or Google Slim Therapeutics today for a free consultation.
Big news, Treasure Coast. Your favorite mortgage team just got even better. Introducing the same trusted faces you know and love, now with Union Home Mortgage.
Hi, this is Shannon Pohl.
Hi, this is Lucy Cranker.
And these high-producing team members bring decades of experience, unwavering honesty, and hearts of gold to every home loan. And here's the best part. Same local processing, underwriting, and appraisers you rely on. Contact Union Home Mortgage.
Visit us online at shannonCpohl.com
and lucycranker.com.
It's time to call Easy Brew Coffee and Bottled Water Service and learn just how much you can save and how convenient it is to have your coffee and bottled water delivered right to your home or office. In addition to water coolers, Easy Brew offers individual bottles of water in 8 or 16-ounce bottles. No more lugging it home or dragging it into the office. Serving the Treasure Coast for over 2 decades, 2 letters, 1 simple name. Easy for Easy Brew. Visit e-zbrew.com or call 800-792-3285. Easy Brew.
At Evergreen Media, we know the people, the businesses, and the work needed to take your marketing to the next level. We know where locals go to shop, work, and have fun.
We're here to focus on your local advertising so you can focus on your business. This is our home. This is our business. Evergreen Media. We market, you grow.
Welcome back to Treasure Coast Connector. We're going to dive back into this conversation with Stephen Koski and John Buckley in the UK about their day on 9/11. We're coming up on the 25th anniversary. Stephen Koski is here because he needs people to come forward and say, yes, he was there for the first 2 days because he's dealing with health problems now. He can no longer stay quiet. He needs your help. Take it away, Stephen.
Sure. So if anyone just joined, we're talking about 9/11. At this point, I've hitched a ride with a Con Edison pickup truck, and I'm heading downtown. So started in Times Square, where you can see the photo here. I was in a lot better shape then. I was a member of what's called the New York Roadrunners, which is kind of the marathon club for New York City, and a lot of elite runners there. And so I had gotten this far and then hopped into the Con Edison truck when he said I could come down and ride with him. So I rode with him. We got through the 34th Street barrier. This time NYPD pulls the barricades back, official vehicle. We roll right through. We come to another set of barricades. It might have been 14th or 13th Street, just above what turned out to be a place called St. Vincent's Hospital. They pull the barricades back again. But what I saw there was I saw a lot of families, and all this has come together for me a couple of decades later. But those were families of firefighters and police officers who were trying to find out what had happened to their family member. And so they're all outside the hospitals, they're calm, but they're very agitated, trying to find out what's happened to their loved ones. And so we go through that barricade, and now we come to this open plaza at 12th Street and 7th Avenue, I guess it was, which is the west side of St. Vincent's Hospital. And there's a big area that's been cordoned off and barricaded off, and a bunch of ambulances parked in backwards, a lot of medical people standing ready along the west wall of the hospital. And to me, it just sort of felt like an army base or something. I don't know what the connection was, but it just looked organized to me. And so what I said to the Con Edison driver, and this was probably my first mistake of the day, right? I said to him, hey, I'm going to hop out here. I think I can help. And in hindsight, he's going downtown to shut off the gas. That's probably the most important mission of the day. I should have stayed with him, been his aide. But instead, I got out at St. Vincent's Hospital and got the ride downtown. So that's what it was like getting down there. And John, I want to pass it over to you just to get some of the British perspective on what's happening at that point later in the day. What you were learning.
So we were watching it on television, and as I say, the building was evacuated, so we had to get out of the room that we'd a trespass into, if you like. So we did that, and as I was not far from the train station, I thought that the best thing I can do is probably go home at this point. And apart from anything else, if of course London did become under threat, as was indeed the rumor, it was not a bad place to get out of. So I got home at about, I guess it must have been about 5:30, 6 o'clock my time. It was on the television again. Of course, my wife greeted me with, utter horror. We watched the news footage, which was, at that point, all they had was repeated images of the towers collapsing. And I remember saying to my wife, there's got to be tons of asbestos in there that's going to be sprayed all around Lower Manhattan. And there's some serious health issues that are building up for those that are under it, trying to get away. And those that are like the firefighters and obviously now I've later learned Steve was amongst them, trying to help. And then on the evening news, it said that the fire department was sending firefighters up the stairs, which is phenomenal bravery. Probably some of the bravest acts I think I would ever known, to walk straight into a building of that height. Go upstairs and you're carrying all that heavy equipment, weighed down by boots and helmets and all that kind of stuff, to try and deal with the blaze, which of course, again, as we later learned, would have been a near impossible task. But what bravery with those guys. So we could only just sit there in shock as to what was going on, and gradually the pieces of the puzzle were coming together in terms of who the perpetrators were and the various timelines, but it took quite a while for that to come through. And then the following day, the papers carried one of the saddest images I've ever seen, which is basically the first 6 stories of the World Trade Center just kind of still standing, and the rest of it just rubble. So an incredibly sad day, and President Bush, of course, coming on and saying that America was now on a war footing, which I guess it was. We'd seen the attacks on the World Trade Center. We'd also seen the attacks on the Pentagon, which effectively made it a military operation as opposed to hijacking civilian artifacts and attacking civilian buildings, which is, again, not really a military thing, but pretty awful nonetheless. But the attack on the Pentagon really turned it into a military operation.
Sure. And in fact, the UK had 67 dead out of the World Trade Center collapse, and that's behind Americans, that's the next largest population that was horribly impacted through all this.
It was indeed, Stephen, and some of them I did know not well, but the 6 employees of the company I worked for, who were, in fact, we didn't have an office there, but were actually visiting on business. But some from Cantor Fitzgerald and some from JP Morgan. It was, 67 is horrendous, but 3,000 was just unfathomable, really. And then it's not going to stop at 3,000, as we know, because there's the fallout from those that were helping, trying to clear up, and then the longer term issues that need to be taken care of, the longer term effects. As I said, I was saying to my wife, that building was put up in the 70s, where it was almost certain that asbestos was used in its construction. And if you look at the way it fell, the fallout from the in-between floors bit kind of sprayed out over a massive blast radius. And so there must have been a huge number, far more than the 3,000 that were directly killed, that were impacted by that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so let me take you now. We're at St. Vincent's Hospital. 20 plus years later, I find out that's the flagship of the medical response to 9/11. This was a very special hospital where they would bring any VIPs, anything like that. And so it was where you brought all your uniformed first responders to get worked on. And so that's what I did. On 9/11, I washed off and FDNY, NYPD, PAPD, any of the uniformed people were brought to us, and they came through an ambulance bay, a garage, where I worked with a group of people. That's the second group of people I'm trying to locate after the Con Edison employee. I'm trying to locate the nurses, including Nurse Next Level, who was some kind of superhero in that environment, and all the nurses, and the Vietnam medic who I worked along with, who was my battle buddy there, trying to locate those folks. So we brought in all the FDNY, NYPD folks. We washed them, we cleaned them, and I was able to go in there and straighten out the processes. We started swapping out how they were using the same dirty water. We were cleaning that up and making that process work. I got them to bring more buckets, so we had clean and dirty water and clean sponges. And then I had them hang IV bags from the ceiling so we could clean out their eyes. So that's the group that I'm looking for there in that hospital. Later in the day, we headed downtown in an ambulance from St. Vincent's down to Chambers Street. And Chambers Street turned out to be kind of where they brought the vehicles in and out. And I had, John, to your point, there was a solid dust cloud down there. It's nighttime on 9/11. I get down there, a briefer comes up, FEMA or city emergency, somebody, and briefs us on what's going on. And I told my team, I picked out a spot to set up underneath the overpass at Chambers Street. So I set up under there. I wanted overhead cover. That's a normal infantry thing. So I set us up under there. We set up our IV bags again with the system I designed where we could clean out their eyes with gravity-fed saline. Somebody grabbed a couple stretchers out of the ambulance. We're back in business now with a downtown aid station. Down there, I met the New York National Guard, about 10 to 12 people, a tall white lieutenant colonel, male. We're looking for him and his crew, and a couple Culligan Water folks. We're looking for them as well.
So what I have to say is we have less than a minute left. So, John, I want to say thank you so much for joining us from the UK. Stephen, for you to be here in the studio with me. And I'm going to look at this camera, and I'm going to say to those people that are listening on the radio and, of course, on the podcast, go to the YouTube channel for Evergreen Media, EGM Network, or Treasure Coast Connector. I want you to watch this episode. I want you to see Stephen's photo from 2001, because he needs needs people to come forward and say, yes, we worked with him. He was an Army Ranger. He had the ability to help as a first responder, but he wasn't part of the firefighters or the police. So there's really no record. So we need you to come forward and say, we worked with him so that he can get the health attention, the health care that he needs at this late stage, because John isn't kidding. Oh, and we're out of time. So sorry. This happened once before, and